Alright, for today's critical thought, we're going to be talking about failure states, or just failure in general, when it comes to playing a video game. And this is a very interesting topic that has certainly evolved over the years and as game design has grown and been iterated on. Now, when we talk about the basic definition of what a game must have a win and loss state. If you want, in order to win, there must be the threat of failure or losing, or it doesn't really matter. But as we've seen over the years, things have certainly changed in interesting ways, and depending upon who you talk to, some people feel that video games don't need a fail state in order to entertain, as we've seen with the quote unquote walking simulator genre, and games implementing more tools and systems designed to push a player through no matter what, be it recovery mechanics or having the easy mode for games such as the Mass Effect series, RPGs in general, and of course from like the recent Mario games, the Superstar or wherever that was that basically gives you invulnerability for a level if you die too many times. But understanding the how to do failure right in a video game or to implement it is a very tricky aspect because no one likes to fail when it comes to playing a video game as in real life. But it has to be a presence in your game in order for your game to matter. If it's too light, then basically any tension or challenge of your game goes right out the window. If it's too strong, it can force a lot of people to just quit your game in sheer frustration. To give you examples of both ends of the spectrum, I've talked about Amnesia the Dark Descent before, and how the second I found out that there was no threat of failure at all in the game, in fact, it was quicker to let the enemies kill me rather than try to play cat and mouse with them or hide and seek, any tension and horror of that game just disappeared. Because why should I be scared where I'm essentially immortal? Now, on the other hand, we have something like XCOM Enemy Unknown / Enemy Within, and playing the game at the highest difficulty, which I believe it was called Legend for XCOM 1. I forget the exact title, but it's the hardest one. And I've talked about this before when it comes to feedback loops, which we'll go into more detail about in a second. But in XCOM, basically, if you lose any mission in the first 2 months of play, you might as well just restart because you will just be in such a deficit that you won't be able to recover. Basically, because in order to upgrade your squad, you need to get people to reach these certain veterancy levels. But if you lose your squad of your highest ranked people, you're just going to be in deep trouble. And that's one of the challenges of overtuning when it comes to failure. It's when the feedback loop becomes too polarized, in the sense that if you win, you're always going to keep winning. But the second that you lose one time, the downward spiral is unavoidable and you can't pull out of it. And that's where a lot of people find that failure in game design is too powerful, when it's basically all or nothing. And another example of that would be stuff that we've seen in bullet hell shmups, where if you lose or you lose a life at any point and you lose your special, your primary weapons, you're kind of in deep trouble. And it's basically easier to beat the game on a single life rather than dying and then having to regain those upgrades. Now, when it comes to balancing out failure like that, it's not so much about the difficulty of the game itself. It's more about what the punishment is for losing. It goes back to that classic adage of you may lose a battle, but you could win the war, or vice versa. If I lose a fight, or lose a match, or whatever, am I immediately screwed forever in this gameplay? If that's the case, then maybe failure is too powerful, or the failure state is too polarized. But if I can regain myself, or if there are other means of progression, then it's a different story. And we've talked about this before with having multiple ways of progressing to avoid grinding or that negative fail state. Now, another example or another way is to make failure prominent, but have its impact be minimized to a certain extent. And a really good example of this is from the Souls series. As we've talked about and as you've seen here on the channel, the Souls games can be very difficult to play. These are games that demand 100% of your focus, and if you fail or you're not able to keep up, you're going to get killed, and you're going to get killed repeatedly, as we have seen many times over on my plays. But when you die, the only real punishment you have is losing your souls, or if you haven't played the series, your currency. But that's not a huge loss in the long term of things. If I lose, 5,000 souls, yeah, I'm going to be a little bit behind, but I can just immediately get right back to that fight. Now imagine, for instance, in a Dark Souls game, if I die, I lose, let's say, anywhere between 1 to 10 of my levels, and I will have to regain those back again. Well, that's a different story. And that leads once again back into the idea of a too strong of a feedback loop, wherein if I lose, I keep on losing. And MMOs have used this before in the past, such as, I believe it was Guild Wars, and probably even stuff like earlier versions of World of Warcraft and other ones, where when you die, you will suffer a stat penalty for who knows how long. Could be 30 minutes, could be an hour, could be until you get your corpse back. But each time you die, that stat penalty gets progressively bigger and bigger, so it becomes harder for you to keep coming back. And again, when the player, and we've talked about this before with progression, but if the player feels like they are losing progress or they're not gaining any, it becomes a lot harder to keep them invested. And that's what happens when failure gets too big, wherein I lose at any point during the 10 hours of play, I basically just wasted 2 to 3 hours of my play, or even more than that, because then I have to recoup that. Or in games where I die and there's just no way for me to recover. And that's where you have to be very careful when it comes to balancing failure. Because like I said, there still has to be some impact. It could be as light as a slap on the wrist, it could be as heavy as a punch in the face. But something has to condition the player to say, hey, you don't want to lose. And there is a lot more we can talk about this. And we want to get into detail about level design, balancing difficulty settings, and even rewards themselves. We could be here for another 10 to 15 minutes. But we'll keep things on the shorter side for now. If you have anything specific you want me to cover more in depth, let me know in the comments below. But when it comes to balancing your game around failure, you have to ask yourself, just how much do I want to punish the player for losing? As we've seen before, especially in the roguelike genre, typically when you die, that's it. We're back to square one again. And easier or longer roguelikes may implement persistent elements or systems, as we've seen. As we've talked about before, stuff like the buying of Isaac and unlocking new items for subsequent levels, renowned explorers with the new Explorer card system, and so on. The idea, of course, in these games is that yes, you are going to start back again at the start, but you're not going to start back at square one or square zero. You'll have something regained from that. Now, for games that aren't built on roguelike mechanics, this is where video games have evolved tremendously over the years. As we've seen in the early days of the game industry, I'm talking 70s to probably late 80s, early 90s, most video games were either built for the arcades or were designed around arcade mechanics, the whole idea of metrics-driven game design. And the fact that these games wanted you to lose every few minutes just so you had to keep putting money in. And first-generation console games also fell into that. Everyone loved the whole idea of lives, where you run out of lives and your entire game is done. Now, lives as a system have been downplayed, and I think at this point is just about dead. I believe the only major company that still makes use of lives is Nintendo with the Mario games, but they've gotten a lot more generous over the years with that. But that would be an example of a system designed to punish failure. You run out of lives, all your progress is gone. And that is something that, as we've seen, has become pretty much unfavored by a lot of game designers and, of course, the players themselves. It was okay when games were an hour to 2 hours long. When games are 30 plus hours long, no one wants to start back at zero with that. So that's why we've seen other ways of implementing failure or designing around it. Now, some games have gone with the idea of allowing players to increase the failure state or increase the risk of failure, such as with difficulty modifiers. Or some games have even added in an Iron Man option. For instance, in Shovel Knight, you can choose to forego checkpoints, and there's even an achievement for getting through the game without making use of a checkpoint. And of course, the punishment, though, is that if you die at the very last scene in a level, you're going all the way back to the beginning. And we've even seen games go a step further with having the super hardcore mode where you have one life and that's it. But it's a very interesting design consideration. I'm curious, for those of you watching this, what do you think about that? In the sense of basically letting the player pick and choose how much failure they're going to be dealing with. And also, for those of you watching this, what are your thoughts on failure in game design? Are you fans of games where it's more of a slap on the wrist? As in, I die, and I may just go back to a checkpoint. Or I may just even reappear in the same room or same area. Or do you prefer games where it's a little bit more difficult? Again, such as roguelites where you die and you're back at the start. Or you die and you may lose all your equipment, you may lose your resources, and so on and so forth. And again, it is very polarizing among gamers and designers as to how much failure should impact a game. And my last question, because we can stir this pot one more time, what do you think about games where there are no failure states? And again, we can talk about the quote-unquote walking simulator genre. Do you think that is acceptable, or that is still considered a video game when there is no threat of any kind of punishment or failure while you're playing? Let me know what you think in the comments below, but thank you so much for watching today's Critical Thought. Be sure to like and subscribe if you're new, and check back for daily discussions on game design here, and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Until our next video, have a great night. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and come back nightly around 10 Eastern for regular game streams. For a collection of my writings as well as weekly podcasts on game design topics, be sure to check out game-wisdom.com. You can follow me on Twitter at GWBycer for updates from me throughout the day. And be sure to check out our Patreon campaign. You can find us on Patreon under GWBycer for ways to not only support Game Wisdom, but you can get access to our Discord channel where we'll talk game design topics, as well as allow you to vote for our Saturday night grab bag stream. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoy the next video here on the Game Wisdom YouTube channel.